I have no complaints about this machine, really. It's 19 years old. It's got a lot of hours on it. A lot of honeys went through here. This is the first time we've had to tear it apart and do major repairs. Of course, we've had to fix a few chains and belts and hoses and knives and things like that, but as far as major tear down, this is the first time we've had to do it. It ran pretty good this summer. We didn't realize how bad things were getting because it was running smooth, but some of our bushings are almost completely gone. We had a couple of bushings go out so badly that they wallered out the holes they were in because the shaft was running on metal to metal. So all of these sprockets, all of the parts that are coming off are fairly well worn. You can't see it in this picture. It's hidden by this angle iron, but Dave, I should say, I keep saying I should say Dave, ground this out. They put a new tube in it, and we had a friend come over here and weld it in. Did a great job of welding. They also replaced these lower little collars where we have bushings down there for sprockets. This brings the drive from the motor on the other side over to this side of the conveyor, so they can drive the feed chain on this side. And the old shaft was running metal to metal, so it was kind of screwed up this shaft, so we got a brand new shaft. We got several $1,000s in this little job, but we're doing the right thing by getting it all right.
So this metal was rubbing on this metal, which is where the bushing was supposed to be, so you couldn't just put a new bushing in it. So here we are.
Yeah. It feels good getting all this done, though. We've got new collars on that side. It'll get new bushings throughout. Yeah, we got a new main shaft, a bunch of new bushings, a couple of new sprocket shafts. The extractor seems fine. That's a pretty simple machine right there. We've worked on this part of the extractor before. We've replaced the clutch and the brake a couple times. It's all in really good condition at this time, so we're not going to touch it. Still the same electric motor. We've had to redo this once or twice. That's the clutch. This thing accelerates with a clutch. It's not any type of gear reduction or I don't know. It's not a DC motor that is variable speed. The motor fires up at full speed, and then this clutch just slips a little until the basket gets up to speed. So that does need maintenance from time to time, but at this time it's in really good shape, so we're not going to touch it. The more pieces we took apart, the more we saw was wrong. It was a proverbial can of worms. So every bushing, every moving part is being dealt with. These plastic bushings that so many of these shafts, and especially these vibrating knife shafts right here, we're looking pretty fatigued. There's a picture of one. It's not in too good a shape. Luckily it was not steel to steel yet. We kind of got it in time. Really odd. It felt pretty tight. At first we thought we might not do anything, but then we touched something. I forget what it was, and we thought, well, we should replace that. And then when we took that apart, we said, well, we better replace this. So the decision was eventually made just to overhaul the whole thing. The chains are good. The feed chains are still in really good shape, so we're not going to do anything with those chains. These sprockets are getting new bushings. The brass bushings are made out of something called oil light, which is kind of self-lubricating, but we put vegetable oil on them anyway. So we're putting new knives on it. The new knives look to be far superior to the old ones. These things are more substantial. These little guides that keep the knife from digging into the frame. We had to replace them on the old knives. They broke off, and we put our own little version made out of angle iron on them. So these look pretty good. pretty sharp.
Pretty
too.
sharp too.
Yeah. So these are the old blades, and they've hung in there pretty good, but the new ones look a lot better. And these are the original little guide thingies that keep the blade off the wood when the frame goes through. And this one was broken and had to be replaced. We just did a cheap fix-it. These blades were actually soldered instead of welded, so the new ones are much improved over that. This one's actually bent a little bit just from use. We never did anything to actually bend it. It just kind of bent with fatigued over time. These new blades are going to be a lot better. They look a lot better anyway.
We're going to put new heater hoses on it for the cutter blades.
Yeah.
In the past, when something jams up, a frame catches the hose and can break the hose. So we actually had a splice in the hose, so it's just time to put new hoses on it.
So I used to have a Cowen Mini uncapper, and it was sold by Walter T. Kelly Company a long time ago, and they suggested using steam. We don't actually use steam to heat these knives. We just use very hot water. Keeping the knives hot, keep the knives clean. It lets the wax and the honey run off the knives easily and quickly so that the knives are clean and cut properly. So hot water works great. You don't have to go with steam to get this job done. So this is our simple little hot water heater. Very simple. It was actually made by Cowen too. It's just a 4-inch thin wall stainless steel tubing welded into an L, and that's just a standard circulating pump right there. We've got dozens of them in the building, so we always keep 1 or 2 in stock to replace one quickly and easily if needed. It's got a 115 volt heating element with a thermostat on it. This one actually I purchased at Walter T. Kelly Company a long time ago. I'm guessing they still sell them over there at Kelly B's, or now Man Lake. And circulating pump, we turn it up pretty hot, probably 200 degrees, just hot enough to where it won't boil, and that keeps the knives pretty clean. What was wrong with that motor that had a bearing going
The
out?
motor's fine. The gearbox, there's a bearing on a very short shaft, and you can't get any service parts for these guys, so the only option is to replace the whole thing.
So,
but this one, as you can see, the mounts are broke from
yeah, it's
past problems from the chain getting bound up and bringing everything to a screeching halt. So
what'd that baby run us? I forget, $800 or
$800.
something? Yeah. At first they were out of them, then suddenly they had them. We picked that up from Granger's. Even Cowen suggested just going straight to Granger's for that part because that's where they buy them. The air ram system seems to be in really good shape still. Nothing wrong there. We use a little honey bear filled with vegetable oil for lubing all the bushings. We do it often. We keep them well lubed, and that's probably why we got so many years out of this thing without having to replace the bushings. Of course, vegetable oil would be considered food grade. I used to purchase food grade silicone spray to lube everything, but that's really fairly expensive, and I honestly believe that vegetable oil probably works about as well, a lot cheaper. That's actually what was recommended by Cowen. That's where I picked up on that idea. Okay. Near as we can tell, this little gearbox for, I don't know what you'd call this thing. It's like a reduction box for driving the drive chain that moves the frames through the uncapper. It seems to be in excellent shape, so we're not going to touch that. Motor, of course, is doing a good job. All of these bearings here seem to be really good, so knock on wood, I think we're just going to leave those alone for the moment. Of course, we've had to replace these belts numerous times. We'll put some new belts on it again before we fire it back up. Well, the auger seems to be in really good shape. It also has an oil light brass bushing down there where the shaft goes through, but it seems to be really tight. I don't think we're going to mess with that any at this time. We had a tank spring a leak on the inside and had a bunch of water in the honey, so we are going through all of our tanks and checking them out very closely. We've already re-welded 2 on the inside to make sure that never happens again. That's an expensive mistake when you get a whole, that tank holds, let's see, 10 drums of honey. You don't need that getting a bunch of water in it. Louis found it, accidentally found it, luckily found it. Yeah, so we're going through all of these tanks, checking them out and re-welding some of them on the inside. So he's going to take 2 tanks out of here today. That one he's got, and then this one. Tight squeeze. But we made this room in the doorway so we could get a forklift in here if we needed to. Usually we move pallets and stuff in and out with an electric pallet jack.
1, 2, 3. Alright. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Alright, easy, good. You got it done.
These are expensive tanks. We've been very happy with them, but I don't know why that one sprung a leak, but I ain't gonna let that happen again. Okay guys, you're gonna have to clean up this stand before the tank comes back.
So Bob, how did water get in the tank to begin with?
Well, this weld that is between the water jacket on the bottom and the tank of honey on the top developed a pinhole in it. We actually found 2 that had a pinhole in them, and we think it's due to years of expansion and contraction, you know, heat, cold,
Right.
and just kind of fatigued the weld a little bit. So seeing as we found that hole in 2, we just went ahead and redid the weld on the inside of the tank on all of the tanks to make sure that never happened again.
Right. Is this
So,
where it says leak right here? That must have been like where it was, huh?
yeah, that would have been where it was leaking, yeah. That's
Wow.
right. So I got this idea of building the tanks like this from my brother-in-law Peter in Gardena, California. He made all of these tanks for me. Has a big shop there in Gardena, makes everything stainless steel. So I called him up and asked him about making a bunch of double jacketed tanks, and he seemed a little puzzled. He said, "Why do they need to be double jacketed?" And I said, "Well, I need to heat them up pretty good." He says, how hot are you trying to get them?" I said, "We're just going to run them between 95 and 100, but I want them to be capable of getting up to 140 if need be." And he said, "You probably don't need a double jacket." At that time, he said he was making a bunch of tanks for a soup kitchen in LA, and those tanks needed to get up to 160, and all they were doing was creating this water jacket on the bottom here. They weren't double jacketed. And he said, "Those tanks will get up to 160. There's no reason that concept wouldn't work for you." And so he talked me into it, and I went ahead and did it, and it worked. I mean, it was, yeah, very smart. So double jacketing is not necessary. You just need that water bath on the bottom. Let's see, what are we set at here?
Oh, yep.
Yeah, so this tank is set at 97 degrees. And the thermometer says pretty much the same thing. So that thermostat right there senses when the tank cools down below 97, and it kicks on a water pump that circulates hot water into this bottom water bath. You can see that this hot water heater is set at 140. And right there is kind of a 2-inch pipe that's used as a water manifold. And every tank feeds off of that. Every tank has its own individual pump for circulating water through that given tank. So the word that you hear right now is this main pump. Every time a tank turns on, that pump right there circulates water through the hot water heater and back into the 2-inch manifold. And the hot water heater senses that circulation and turns on. So see, if that number 140 was not there, the hot water heater would be off. There'd be no water circulating through it. So at any given time, there could be anywhere from 1 to, well, up to 9 tanks circulating at the same time. We have 9 tanks total.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how many are on right now, but
Yeah.
there has to be at least one or that hot water heater wouldn't be working.
So does it get louder as more turn on?
Well, yeah, it does. You hear more pumps running, so yeah,
Okay.
the whir sound gets kind of louder if there's a number of tanks running at the same time.
Yeah.
So right now I see, let's see, I see honey in 1, 2, 3 tanks in this room.
Yeah.
And then I know there's honey in 1 tank in the other room. That's these sight glasses right here. It tells us where the honey level is.
Okay, that's what that means, how much honey.
Yeah.
And you said this is 10 barrels of honey?
Well, this tank will hold 10 barrels. It's a 600-gallon tank. That one's a 600-gallon. Those 2 over there are 600-gallon. These 2 in the middle are, they'll hold 5 drums. Those will
Okay.
hold 10 drums.
Yeah, they are a little smaller.
Yeah, they're a little smaller. These are my original tanks. That's probably why this one started to leak. That's an old tank. I had that made, oh gosh, maybe 20 years ago. So that's a
Yeah.
lot of fatigue, a lot of
Right.
heating, cooling.
It's bound to
And then
happen.
about 9 years ago, I had these, well, there's 6 of these 600-gallon tanks. So they were made about 9 years ago. And they don't have quite the fatigue on them that those 2 small tanks right there do.
Yeah, I noticed these ones have a smaller, like, water reservoir than that one.
Yeah, honestly, you
Is that-
don't, the reservoir doesn't need to be this big. This one looks like
Oh.
about 8 inches. This one's about 6. If I was doing these tanks over again, I'd probably only make it about 4 inches.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be quite that big. Well, originally, these actually had an electric hot water heating element in it. And that's what this hole right here is for. I used to have a 3,000 watt electric heating element in there. And then where this outlet is right here was a big tube that went up the side. It was like the filling reservoir, big 2.5-inch tube that was full of water. And then around the back was a vent, and that's how they were engineered to be used in the first place. But when we moved over here and we changed to this different type of system, you know, we rearranged everything.
So why does that say 140?
Because that's the temperature of the water that's running
Okay.
into that 2-inch pipe.
That makes sense.
So by the time the water gets to the bottom of these tanks, it's probably about 135.
Okay, yeah.
Might have cooled to 130, but 135 probably. And then that'll, you know, warm the honey up. And as soon as the honey gets up to 97, which is what she has it set at, the pump will kick off. Of course, the water down there is still pretty warm, so it'll continue warming for a while.
Yeah, it's much warmer down here than it is up here.
Yeah, and that's the way it's meant to be.
'Cause- yeah,
This is like
exactly.
the warming element.
I gotcha.
And what happens here is that, you know, people say, well, what about the honey up here, up high? Well, how do you get it warm? Well, heat rises, you know, so, you know, as the water in the bottom gets warmer, it radiates throughout the whole tank.
Right.
And not only that, something else kind of strange happens that I really didn't think of in the beginning. As the warm honey on the bottom circulates to the top, it actually stirs the tank. It's so slowly that you can't see it with the naked eye, but you can put several types of honey in this tank, and because it's being warmed from the bottom, over time it actually blends itself. You don't
Okay.
even need to stir it, it just blends itself by the honey kind of rising up and stirring itself,
And all
and then the
getting-
cooler honey
yeah.
sinking to the bottom.
That makes
I know that sounds unbelievable, but it works. It happens. I see it do it over and over and over. It blends itself.
Yeah.
Anyway, bottom line is you don't need a double jacketed tank, which is what you see in most catalogs.
Yeah.
You just need this bottom reservoir right here.
That is very smart. I like that.
Yeah, it works. Peter did me right. Now the other thing I figured out, some of these tanks have a pretty big reservoir down here. Like this
Oh, yeah,
one.
it's
This
much
one's
bigger.
probably 8 inches. It does not need to be that big. That was something that could have been just 3 or 4 inches tall, I think. Every tank in the room will run into the manifold that feeds this automatic pouring machine over here if that valve is open. So 7 tanks can feed this thing over here. The two in the extracting room are they're independent of this room, so they can't feed this manifold.
So each one of these connects to this, which they use to bottle with.
That's right,
Okay.
yeah. Or we can hook up a small bottling machine right here and into this valve and, bottle
And just do
individually.
one tank.
Yeah, we usually just use one tank at a time, and then
Okay.
this valve is for drums or buckets or whatever.
Okay.
And that manifold down there is the same temperature. It's set at 97 degrees, so it keeps the honey running through the manifold at a constant temperature. Everything in this room is set at 97, including the automated bottling machine over there. Okay.
Nice.
Machine.
Yeah. It reminds me of that game Mousetrap.
Mousetrap? What?
Yeah, where you like set up all the little sticks and stuff, and then like you send a ball down it, and like you have to make sure your ball gets to where it's supposed to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember that game. That's an old
Yeah,
game. Yeah,
yeah.
cool.
So,
All right, so now Molly knows.
yep.